Sometimes it takes a single voice pushing against everything else to make the impossible happen, even if that voice is as small as a raindrop. Tales of the Void presents the Generous Snowflake.
Every day of every year, clouds form from the water out of the oceans and rivers. These clouds then travel all over the world, but in this tale, we'll follow one headed north. Throughout the journey, hundreds of thousands of raindrops will be created within the cloud. Some will take their leave early and water the forest, farms, and people across the land. The rest will stay together, across the mountain peaks and up towards the chilly atmosphere, to blanket the northern lands in snow. A few of these brave raindrops, now beautiful and unique snowflakes, will journey to the edge of their protective cloud. With their vision unimpeded by the obscuring mists of their home, these snowflakes enjoy a view few creatures have ever witnessed. They peer out into the infinite depth of space and enjoy the twinkle and shine the stars send their way. Many stories are passed among the younger flakes. The most popular one explained that stars were ancient snowflakes that refused to melt, and instead left Earth to share their brilliance with the galaxy. However, the stars did not interest the snowflake of this story. No, while his brothers and sisters cast their gazes upward, he looked down and watched the land pass by below in fascination. He couldn't understand the interest in an inky black void. It didn't have the beautiful colors of flowers as they basked in the sun. It didn't supply the music that humans made as they went about their daily lives, each one as different as the next. Truly, space was lost on this young drop. There were hundreds of examples he could give the other drops for why the Earth interested him. But the things he found most wonderful were the sunny lands of the South. After one wintry season had come and gone, and on their trip back up to the north, the young drop asked his elder why they never released in the south. The elder drop responded with a sad nod and a pat on his shoulder. "Little drop," he said to him, "this is only your third season, and I do not blame your curiosity, but we do not fall here because it is not where we are needed. We are a northern cloud, and our place is there. Our southern cousins will arrive, in time, and wash the land with as much rain as it can handle." "What about the children?" the young drop asked one day as their cloud leisurely floated through the air, barely a quarter of the size it would eventually be. "What about them, little drop?" "Well," he said bashfully, "I've watched the people in the north, especially the children. They love to play in the snow we bring. They make little angels and create round versions of themselves that they dress up with hats and scarves." "And?" the elder drop intoned. "It's just, the southern children don't get that. We fly over them, ignoring their young ones. Most of them have never even seen snow. Can you believe that, elder? They don't know what it's like to have one of us land on their fingers and noses. They can't look at us up close. They can't take us sledding down hills or turn us into massive forts. We're missing as much as they are." "What would you have us do?" "Let's fall here," he shouted, his hands pointing downward. "Just once. Let's leave the north alone. They see us every year and could use the break. Let's just fall here one time and give these people a chance to see something they may have never seen before." The young drop spoke excitedly and drew the attention of many of his siblings. Some enjoyed the idea and thought it might be fun to change things up. With his siblings behind him, the young drop was more excited than ever. All of that was squashed when he looked up to the elder drop and saw him shake his head slowly. "It's not just that we don't do it, but we can't." "But," the young drop's argument was held back by a raised palm. "Feel the wind, young one. It does not stop here. On top of that, there aren't enough of us to cover a front yard, let alone a whole city. And last, perhaps most importantly, it's too warm. The heat would melt us into rain before we got halfway to the ground. The young drop listened to his elder's words with a thoughtful expression. Let this go, little one, the elder drop said before he walked away, satisfied that his words would stick with the little drop. He was wrong, though. His words had only emboldened him more. The young drop wanted to bring the southern people snow more than ever before. At first, his mind flooded with different ideas and plans. The more he thought, the more he realized many of them wouldn't work. So he started again, and again, and again. Each time he had fewer ideas, but they were constantly improving. He also reached out to anyone that would listen and ask, sometimes beg, them to join in his cause. His passion reached many family members, but too often were they afraid to go against tradition. They did not see a point in trying to change the natural order when it worked out just fine as it was. The older drops would kindly refuse his request. They let him know that he was just in a youthful phase. He would realize, eventually, that things were done in a certain way for a reason. While kind words were nice, the little drop needed action. Luckily, the younger drops listened to him more seriously. Many of them rallied to his side and agreed with his desire to bring snow to the south. There weren't as many drops to help him as he wanted, but they would make it work. For several days they planned and prepared. At first it was all a secret, but little was kept quiet in a close-knit cloud like theirs. The elder drop moved towards the section of the cloud that the young drop and his cronies had set up as theirs. He looked up and saw walls erected that had never been there before. "Young drop," he yelled upwards towards the moving heads. "What are you doing now? I thought you understood why this foolishness could not be allowed." "I don't understand anything," the young drop yelled back, now standing atop the wall, a wide grin on his watery face. "I'm just a young drop." He turned his back on the elder and yelled out loudly, "Now!" The elder wanted to say more, but he was interrupted by a violent shaking in the cloud. He looked down and was shocked to see the section the young drops had taken as their own separate from the cloud. Drops ran around frantically on both sides. The older drops tried to figure out what had happened, while the younger ones laughed and cheered as they directed the cloud away from its initial home. Some of the younger drops, the leader of this tiny rebellion included, waved goodbye to the older members of their family. "Good luck in the north," they shouted honestly as they drifted further and further away until their cloud was lost among all the others. Their journey had begun now, and their course set. They would backtrack to where they had come from. They knew they weren't enough to blanket the southern lands, but they could find more clouds with drops that would join their cause. And so they journeyed south, against the winds and beating sun, past landscapes they'd seen before. Migrating birds would often fly by and warn them that they were going the wrong way. But when the young drops explained their plan, the birds laughed at them. "You silly drops! It can't snow in the south, no matter how much you want it to." "Yes, it can!" the drops shouted back at them in defense of their goal. "And we'll be sure to drop all the snow in your head, you featherbrains!" "Ha! We'll be waiting for it!" The birds squawked loudly with one another as they flew off towards their winter retreats. Some of the drops were a little shaken by their hurtful words, but others reassured them that everything would work out. The days passed by one after another as they fought against the northern winds and air currents. At times, the drops were forced to stay up long nights to push themselves and their cloud against the aerial tides. As their journey backwards continued, they were able to gain more drops and even entire clouds to their cause. The more they gathered, the better their leader felt about their odds. He even thought they might be able to cover an entire state, not just one city. However, the young drop was not fully prepared, and when they reached a city named San Antonio, they were met by a cadre of southern clouds. The young drop felt his core shake in fear, but he knew they had information he could use. He pushed through the powerful emotion and jumped to their cloud. He was met by a half a dozen older drops. Though not as aged as his elder, they were older than him by several years. Some of them looked at him curiously, while others kept their expressions neutral. The head drop among them walked forward with a large grin on his face. "Well, dry me up. You're from that northern clown we've heard about, aren't you?" "Yes, that's us," the little drop said nervously. The older drop put his arm around his shoulder and pulled him in close. "It's strange to see you guys down here so late in the year, but I'm all for having guests." What brings y'all around? We're bringing snow. Snow? We haven't had snow in years. Now why are you trying to do a thing like that? The little drop explained his reason to the others, along with the tale of their journey. The older drops listened to him intently. They enjoyed his eagerness to buck the natural order, and after conferring amongst themselves, decided to help. Well, we don't know much about snow, the older drop from earlier said, but we at least know it has to be cold for it to stick around. The northern drop nodded. Our plan was to wait for the sun to set. That's smart, but I've got to warn you, the land here bakes in the sun all day. We do what we can in our clouds, but we can't stand up to that heat for long. So, the little drop asked with confusion. So what I mean is, everything's going to be warm. Even with the sun down, that heat's gonna radiate on up. You better bring in all your other clouds, because chances are you won't have enough to stand up to the heat everywhere. The little drop listened to his words and thanked him for the advice, but he had complete faith in their plan. That night, with the sun swept from the sky, they enacted their plan. He watched the other drops, turned into snowflakes now, as they floated down from their perches high in the sky. The words for this other drop rang through his head as he watched those flakes touch down and rapidly turn to water. As he watched the clouds slowly empty, he knew his grand plan could not succeed. He sent the call out to all the other clouds and instructed them to focus their fall only on the one city. Clouds flowed in from the surrounding sky and filled it even more with their payloads. Time ticked by, and while the flakes had begun to accumulate in the streets and houses, filling trees and covering grass, they barely reached 2 inches. The young drop, leader of this small rebellion against the natural order, felt the weight of all his promises begin to crush him. Alone he sat, not bothering to look out. Even as the flakes continued to fall, he couldn't bear to watch them waste their efforts. At last, he was finally able to tear himself away from his pity, as the last of the snowflakes made their jumps. He looked down and was shocked. For all the flakes that had dropped throughout the city, only a few inches of the snow had been able to stack up, but it might as well have been several feet. Thousands of children and teenagers, and even some adults, were outside playing. Many of them could barely contain their excitement and were outside half-dressed or without a coat or hat. It didn't matter to them, as even those few inches were enough to bring them joy that kept them warm. The young drop didn't waste another second and leapt out of the cloud. He looked down as he floated, watching the people below play and cheer. It made him happier than he could ever remember. A child held out her hand to the sky, trying to catch some of the last snowflakes as they fell. He spotted her and quickly changed his course, towards the tip of her outstretched finger. His aim was perfect, and he landed standing up. The little girl practically shook with excitement as she brought him up close to her face. She marveled at his beautiful shape. As he melted down her finger, the young drop that created this beautiful evening and all its wonder overflowed with happiness. He hoped that when he re-entered the sky to begin the cycle anew, he would have this chance again. The end.
Tales of the Void is a collection of short stories written and performed by Jacob Conflitti. Music and production by Robert Labadine. Thanks for listening. We hope you enjoyed. Until next time.